Today, the capital of the United States is Washington, D.C. But let me start by asking you this. If Washington, D.C. wasn't the first capital of America, then where was it? Why would a country feel the need to change its capital multiple times? Could money, politics, and secret deals be behind this decision? The answer is yes. And this story is much more complicated than you think. When the United States was founded, there was no single capital. In fact, in its early years, the country was almost like a traveling capital. During the Revolutionary War, Congress moved from city to city to find a safe location, because the British Army was still a serious threat. Philadelphia was the first de facto capital of America. But it did not hold this title for long. So why? In 1783, soldiers in Philadelphia revolted. Congress members were threatened by soldiers who hadn't been paid. And the critical point was this. The state of Pennsylvania refused to send troops to protect Congress. This event was a wake-up call for the federal government, because they realized if the capital is located within a state, the federal government would remain dependent on that state. This is where the first major idea for moving the capital was born. After this event, Congress left Philadelphia, and the capital of America became New York. George Washington took the first presidential oath in New York. But this was not a permanent solution, because there was a major power struggle between the states. Northern and southern states were strongly opposed on the location of the capital. Now let's get behind the scenes. In 1790, one of the most important political deals in American history was made. This deal is known today as the dinner table deal. 3 names were at the table: Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. Hamilton wanted the federal government to assume the state's debts. Southern states opposed this. Jefferson and Madison, on the other hand, wanted the capital to be in the South, and that's where the agreement was made. According to the agreement, the federal government would assume the state debts. In return, the capital would be moved not to the north, but close to the southern border. In other words, the decision about the capital was made in exchange for money. That's why America's capital is not only geographic, but also the product of a political compromise. The decision was formalized with the Residence Act of 1790. The new capital was to be designed so that it did not belong to any state. Thus, the federal government would not be under the influence of any state. A swampy area along the Potomac River was chosen. At the time, many people said, "Who would go to such a place?" But George Washington specifically chose this location. Washington, D.C. was intended to be built not just as a city, but as an idea. Buildings were large, streets were deliberately wide, symbols of power were placed at the center. But interestingly, while Washington, D.C. was being built, the capital temporarily moved back to Philadelphia. Philadelphia remained the temporary capital for 10 years. In 1800, Congress finally moved to the new city. When Washington, D.C. became the capital, roads were muddy. Most buildings were unfinished. The White House was not fully ready. Some legislators even resisted moving, saying, "This city is unlivable." But the decision was final. So why specifically Washington, D.C.? Because it did not belong to any state. It was a balance point between North and South. It symbolized federal power. This city was designed to prevent America from being divided. Today, Washington, D.C. is not just a capital. It is also a living reminder of America's first major political compromise. if the soldier revolt in Philadelphia hadn't happened, if that dinner table deal hadn't been made. America's capital today could have been a very different city. Changing America's first capital was not a simple relocation decision. It was a decision about who would hold power, how independent the federal government would be, and how the country would be governed. If this video surprised you, and if you're curious about other hidden firsts in American history, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can explore together why the first money in America failed in the next video.